going to move this a little bit out of your way there. It's all yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Gary. Welcome. We only have a few folks on the webinar today, but we will proceed because we are recording the webinar. This is the meal patterns for the National School Lunch and School Breakfast Program. I'm Dana Parker. I'm the Director of Training at the State Department of Education with Child Nutrition Programs. If you're one of the 3 folks that are on the webinar, I will email you a certificate probably by tomorrow afternoon for your 1 hour of continuing education credits. If you're listening to the webinar and you're wondering later after today that you've decided to listen to the webinar and you're wondering about a certificate or credit for the webinar training, the PowerPoint will be attached. The certificate will be attached to the PowerPoint at the end of the PowerPoint. So there will not be a certificate at the end of the webinar for those that are listening after today. So our objectives for today is for the school lunch and school breakfast meal program is, why do you even need to follow the meal patterns? Why is that important? We're going to discuss what those meal patterns are in the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program. We're going to discuss what makes a reimbursable meal, and we're going to look at a little bit of child nutrition labels and product formulation statements. So for our first poll, I click on polls, Gary?
Yes, please.
Whoop, don't move it. There we go.
Then hit that drop down box there. You're going to actually do poll number 2.
Okay. All right. Our question is going to be, launch it. How many years of experience do you have in child nutrition? There's no right or wrong answer here. I was just going to get an idea of the people on the webinar of how many years experience. And you'll just use your computer to answer the question. All right. I think that is good. So it looks like we have a couple of you that have over 9 years and one that's fairly new. All right, so as always, if you have lots of years of experience, you've probably heard meal patterns and the discussion multiple times, and you probably could teach the class. However, you guys that are under that 3 years of experience may not be as knowledgeable, but I am sure that you are learning lots, and it's always good to even hear the same information repeated just to get a better understanding, because it seems like there's always something that creeps up that we didn't really know about a change, about a exemption that you can apply for, or some other change from USDA that you may not have heard or read about in some of the day-to-day goings on of your school. So let's get into, why do we need to follow the meal pattern? Well, if you want to receive the federal funding to pay for the meals that you serve to the students in your school, you have to follow the meal pattern. And that also includes our state funding. And it's also your commodity dollars, or your POW dollars, is based on the number of lunches served the preceding year. So that is a benefit to your program, those commodity, even if you're receiving the brown box commodities or you're having things processed. It's the nuts and bolts of your program is why you follow the meal patterns. And reimbursable meal, we talk a lot about a reimbursable meal. Well, a reimbursable meal is how you're paid. And to be paid for those meals from the federal reimbursement, state reimbursement, and even for your commodities, you have to have the required number of components or the food items. They have to be planned in the right portion sizes for the right grade groups. And the number of quantities served. Someone must be monitoring these meals to make sure they do meet these requirements. You have to offer that variety of milk, and you have to document not only the things above there in the PowerPoint, but any dietary substitutions that you have. Those have to be documented for review situations to ensure that you are serving those reimbursable meals to be able to collect the reimbursement or the money for those meals. Now, in our, I don't want to say new meal patterns because anything 10 years old is not new. The Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act now is going on its 10th year. So our grade groups now that our meal patterns are divided in, you can see there on the screen. You can have menu groupings of the kindergarten through 5th grade, 6th through 8th grade, 9th through 12th. Offer versus serve, which is where you offer so many components and a student only has to pick up at lunch 3 of the 5, at breakfast 3 of the 4 items. It is not mandatory in any setting except for your lunch setting for your 9th through 12. But there are advantages to being offer versus serve if you are not. Your K through 8 has some overlapping calories and other nutrients that you can do some K through 8 menu planning. 9th through or K through 8, K through 12. For breakfast, you can group that as one menu, but at lunch, you have to separate out the high schoolers. The 9th through 12th has to have a standalone. And this is just a little slide, and we also have this in the Child Nutrition Manual that discusses the overlapping calories. And you can see the K through 8 has some overlapping calories at breakfast from 400 to 500, and at lunch, the 600 to the 650. At breakfast, the 6th through 8th, those calorie ranges, and at lunch, you see there it says no overlap because that 9th through 12th grade has to have its individualized menu plan. Some of the new things that happened this year is a sodium flexibility. We retain the target right now at target 1 for the 2023-24 school year. And supposedly they're moving the target 2 sodium levels to start in 2024, 2025. And then right now it removes the final target. And of course, the way USDA flows, we will see if these targets remain. But as of right now, for this year and next year, we will still remain at target 1 on the sodium levels for the National School Lunch and School Breakfast Program. Signage, if you've been through an administrative review, one of the questions that the reviewer asks you is, where's your signage? If you don't have any, signage is a regulation that you have signage up at the beginning or near the beginning of the line. It's supposed to help the student identify what they need on their plate to make that meal reimbursable. And that signage should be age appropriate, and it should be for breakfast and lunch. Signage is not just a lunch requirement. And a lot of times we, when we're out doing a review, we do not see the signage up at breakfast explaining to the students what they should or should not, what they should have on their tray to make that meal reimbursable. Now let's dive into the actual meat, and I mean that pun lightly, of the meal pattern requirements. There's 5 components that you have to offer for every meal to be reimbursable. They're the meat alternate, grains, vegetables, and of course there's the 5 subgroups in the vegetable component, the fruit, and the milk. This lunch slide that you see here, we have that in the Child Nutrition Manual. We also give this out when you come to a cafeteria manager's training. It has the grade groups broken down and what is required daily and weekly. And if you look on the first, just look at fruits, it has a number and then it has a number in parentheses. The number in parentheses is what is required for that grade group every day. What's to the left of those parentheses, like on the fruit, the K through 5, you have to offer 2.5 cups of fruit over the week, but 1/2 a cup of fruit has to be offered every day. Then your 6 through 8 is exactly the same for the fruit requirement at lunch. And then if you notice, your high schoolers have to be offered 1 whole cup of fruit a day. Then on the vegetable subgroups, you can see how that works. The grade groups have to be offered the weekly requirement of a vegetable component of 3 3/4 cups per week, but each day they have to be offered 3/4 cup. Your high schoolers, a whole cup. And we're going to talk about each of the meal components as we go through here. So let's start with the vegetable component. The vegetable component is now broken down into the 5 subgroups. You have your dark green, leafy, red, orange, beans, peas and legumes, and starchy, and your other. In our dark green vegetable subgroup, which a 1/2 a cup for the week is required for all age grade groups. It's a good source of vitamin A, but remember on the green leafies, a 1/2 a cup, you have to have a whole cup to credit a 1/2 a cup of vegetable. And some of the items that would be a green, dark green / leafy vegetable would be your broccoli component, romaine lettuce, spinach, green leaf lettuce, and some others. And in the CN manual, we have a chart that shows the different vegetable subgroups and gives you some better ideas of the vegetable components that you could offer in the National School Lunch Program. The red-orange vegetable subgroup, you see here the weekly requirements for the K through 8 is you have to offer at least 3/4 a cup throughout the week, and high schoolers have to be offered a 1.25 cups throughout the week. Red orange is a good source of vitamin A, and that includes our carrots, our sweet potatoes, our tomatoes, and maybe on your menus, instead of just listing we're going to have carrots today, maybe we're going to have some eye-catching carrots, and something that might bring, especially in your elementary schools, a tip, to add some creative names to your menu items to entice those kids to come see what you're offering, what a clear-eyed carrot would be, some things like that. Our beans, peas, and legumes in the vegetable subgroup, all the grade groups need a 1/2 a cup over the week. And of course, beans are a good source of folate and potassium. They're a high nutrient content. They're low cost. But remember, a bean can also be counted as a meat alternate, but it cannot be counted as a meat alternate and a vegetable in the same meal. And this is where the menu planner has to make sure they communicate either on the production record, communicate with the staff so that they know if that bean is going to be in the vegetable subgroups or it's going to be as a meat alternate. Starchy vegetables is a 1/2 cup for all grades through the week. And of course, in Oklahoma, I don't think we have a problem getting the starchy vegetable on our menus because that's our potatoes, our corn, our peas, French fries. But you have to really watch, the number of times per week you offer some of the starchy vegetables because of the calorie and other nutrients that attribute to your meal patterns. The other vegetable subgroup, which is, includes our cucumbers, our green beans, onions, iceberg lettuce. For the K through 8, a 1/2 a cup per week. 9th through 12th, you have to have 3/4 of a cup. But you can also use any from this subgroup to meet the additional requirements for the vegetable requirements for the total group for the week. Now, if you're a school that you have a vegetable subgroup, vegetable bar, how does that work? Some schools use the salad bar as just an extra. And that is allowable if you don't have someone to monitor that. Your labor wise, you're not able to have someone out there. It's not able to put the salad bar before the cashier. It has to be after the cashier because your cafeteria just, you can't situate it. Those do not count in your subgroups. Remember, those do not count in your subgroups, but the calories and the other nutrients will count in your weekly nutrient analysis if we're required to do one. But you need to be monitoring that to make sure somehow you're staying within the nutrients for the National School Lunch and Breakfast Program. Now, if you can figure out a way to get that salad bar where it is monitored by someone on your staff, then that salad bar can be counted towards your subgroups. The calories, of course, and nutrients are still a part of the analysis, but it's now going to be as a part of the reimbursable meals. So the children are maybe picking up more of what they will eat, and it could save you money to be able to have that where you can monitor that bar. Look at that. If you are one of those schools that the salad bar is just being served as an extra, look at your cafeteria. Look at ways that maybe you could move that where it is before the cashier. Maybe they go through the salad bar line first and then through the serving line. That would be one way it could be monitored, because then if that last person in line or your cashier is the one responsible for monitoring the meal to make sure it's reimbursable, it would be could be counted towards your reimbursable meals. Now, if you're a school district that's a 4-day a week or longer, those weekly requirements do change depending on if you're a shorter or longer. The vegetable subgroups are slightly affected, and I would ask if you're a shorter or longer school week that you need to look in the child nutrition manual. We have those on page CM 32 through 33 on the exact requirements for a longer or shorter school week. So now we're going to have our next polling question, and I'm going to launch that. The question is going to be, the vegetable subgroups only have to be served or offered to students once a month. Is that true or false? So the vegetable subgroups only have to be served or offered to students once a month. All right. We're going to end the polling because with only 3 of you on here, and I just want y'all to know you guys made a perfect score. That is false. The vegetable subgroups have to be offered on a weekly basis to your students. Y'all are awesome. All right, now let's talk about our fruit component. The fruit component, of course, if you're going to serve juice, it has to be 100% full strength juice. No more than half of the weekly fruit offering can come in the form of juice. And then we talked about the lettuce, that you had to offer a whole cup for it to credit as a half a cup. Your dried fruit works just the opposite. 1/4 of a cup of dried fruit credits for a half a cup. And remember that make sure if you're the menu planner that you note that on the production, and your people serving on your serving line understand this, because that could really be a cost factor if they think they have to serve a whole exact half cup of this dried fruit instead of just what you've costed out at that 1/4 cup serving size. So our fruit component for the week for our K through 5 and our 6 through 8 is a half a cup per day. And then for our 9th through 12th graders, like I said earlier, is a full cup of fruit per day. But remember, when this is offered, it could be as little as 1/8 of a cup. So if you have, you made some type of cobbler and you're going to count the fruit in that cobbler, as long as it credits an eighth of a cup. That can be counted in your weekly requirements. And also remember, it's not necessarily what's on the tray, it's what's offered. So if you're the 9th through 12th graders have the offer versus serve, you may be offering 2 half cups of vegetable and 2 half cups of fruit to make your whole cup of fruit and your whole cup of vegetable. If the student picked up, say, the whole cup of vegetable, they would only have to have a half a cup of fruit on that tray. They wouldn't have to necessarily have the whole cup of fruit. Okay, we're going to quickly move on to another polling question. I kind of lost where I was there for just a minute, but I'm back. All right, this polling question is, fruits and or vegetables may only be credited as part of the reimbursable meal if they're served in the required serving size. In other words, you only credit them if they're served in the half cup or full cup servings. All right, we'll go ahead and end the poll, and it looks like you guys are very, very on ball today. You are correct. That is false. You can credit as long as you have an eighth of a cup, and that also is in the vegetables too, and I didn't have that as a slide, but as long as it, and say you have, say you're serving a pizza and you have a CN label that says, you know, that slice of pizza credits 2 ounces of meat, 2 ounces of bread, and an eighth a cup of vegetable serving. Remember, you can count that toward, especially that red orange, for that weekly requirement. So let's look at our meat alternate. Our K through 5 and our 6 through 8 both need 1 ounces of meat alternate per day. And over the week, you need 8 ounces equivalent. So that tells you right there, if you're a 5-day school week and you only offer 1 ounce every day, you're going to be 3 ounces short by the end of the week because you needed a total of 8 ounces. So at some point during the week, you have to increase your meat alternates servings from 1 ounce to at least a 2 to make that. Your 9th through 12th graders need 2 ounces per day or 10 for the week. And a lot of times if you're doing the nutrient analysis, as long as you're serving some low fat type meats, you can get the calorie range in there even for your K through 5 and 6 through 8 to serve 2 ounces of meat alternate every day. But it's something that you would just need to look at and see if that is a possibility for your menus. So what is a meat alternate? Well, I Googled what a meat alternate was, and there's no good definition other than it's a protein that meets the same nutrients as a meat. So some of the things in our program that you can offer as a meat alternate would be eggs, yogurt, tofu, peanut butter, of course the beans, and then the last two, the tempeh and the surimi. And I listed the memo SP 25-2019. That was the newest USDA memo that came out and said that these two items can be served as a meat alternate in the child nutrition programs. I've not seen any of those on a menu in Oklahoma, but that's always a possibility. So our next polling question we're going to have is going to ask the question, the serving size offered of a meat alternate at lunch must be how many ounces for the 9th to 12th grade group? And this is a multiple choice, so you are going to decide if your high school, your 9th or 12th graders had to have 1 ounce of meat per day, 2 ounces per day, no minimum of meat alternate at lunch, or none of the above. All right, y'all are very quick. So far, we are about 100% on our polling questions, because we don't want to call them test questions. But that is correct. 2 ounces of meat alternate per day in the 9th through 12th grade. And of course, 1 ounce per day in your K through 5, your 6 through 8. But you have to reach that minimum 8 per week for the K through 8. Our grain components, and remember this year we went backwards a little bit, that not all of your grains have to be whole grain rich. Only half of your grains that you offer through the week must be whole grain rich. Schools must offer the daily and weekly minimum servings. You can offer more on some days to meet those weekly minimums. And the smallest amount that credits for a bread grain item is it has to weigh 1/4 of an ounce. So this just kind of shows you the K through 5, again, the 6th through 8th, the 9th through 12th on the grain requirements for the National School Lunch Program. So and this slide has the weekly minimum requirements, and it has 8 to 9 ounces on the K through 5 and 8 to 10 ounces, almost appearing like there is a maximum on the grains, and there are not. The minimum serving of 8 for the K through 8 and the minimum serving of 10 ounces per week is what is required in the National School Lunch Program. There are no maximums. The only thing on the maximum is, you couldn't serve 10 bread grains a day because of the calories and other nutrients that would cause the nutrient analysis to not be correct in your school. A whole grain rich item, I know we've talked about whole grain rich the last couple of years. The basic, what you need to remember for a product to be a whole grain rich is that it is at least 50% of the product is whole grain and the other grain ingredients are enriched. If all the grains in the product are whole grain, then it is also a whole grain product. Does the product meet the portion size and the requirements? So if the whole grain is greater than 8 grams of whole grain and or has a product, the FDA approved whole grain health claim, or does this product first ingredient begin with a whole grain? So in the red there on the slide, that product is a whole grain oat, modified cornstarch, and some other items there. So whole grain oats are a whole grain, and then there are no other grains in this product. So this item would be a whole grain rich item because its first ingredient, which is the majority of the product, would be a whole grain. And we're not going to talk too much today about the grains chart, but just want to bring it to your attention that when you're looking at breads, to make sure they meet the equivalent servings, that you are paying attention, such as slices of bread. Sometimes they weigh more or less than an ounce. So be cognitive of that when you're ordering in your bread. Examples I like to use is Brahms breads. You can buy them in different ounce sizes per slice. So you would need to be reading the nutrient facts on that package of bread to see, first of all, how much each slice would weigh, to ensure that if it did not weigh the 1 ounce, that you served enough, that you're not caught short on your bread grains. And the other items of what size you would need to serve. For an example, if you decided you were going to serve a brownie at lunch and you were going to count it in your bread grains, a if you look down there, and I'm sure this slide's a little hard to see, but the bread grains chart is in your food buying guide. And we do give those out when you come to cafeteria managers also. But a brownie has to weigh 4.4 ounces to count for a 1 ounce serving of bread grain. So a 1 ounce brownie doesn't just automatically credit for a 1 ounce bread grain because of the sugar and other ingredients that go into a brownie. In other words, the more sugar it has, the more it has to weigh to count for a bread serving in the National School Lunch Program. And now that we've talked about brownie and made everybody hungry, you have to remember you can serve no more than 2 ounces of desserts, grain-based desserts per week. Now, if your grain-based desserts are whole grain rich or not whole grain rich, you've got to keep in mind half of your grains have to be whole grain rich. So if you had been previously putting maybe a white cookie or a regular cookie on your menu and counting it as an extra, it no longer counts as an extra. It will be in that calculation for your grains for the week. And I think that has caught a few folks this year during review situations. So make sure you're counting all of your grains for the week and that half of those are whole grain rich. And the last bullet there, if you're feeding your pre-Kers, the CACFP or the Child and Adult Care Food Program meal pattern, dessert items are not allowed at all. Now let's go to our next polling question. And this polling question says, SFAs must offer how many whole grain rich components per week? Do you have to offer 10 whole grain rich components for all grades? All grain components must be whole grain rich. 1/2 of the grain components must be whole grain rich, or none of your grains have to be whole grain rich. You can just do whatever you want to do. So what do you guys think? You think you have to offer 10 whole grain rich components per week, or all of your grain components must be whole grain rich, or half of your grains components must be whole grain rich, or none of your grain components must be whole grain rich? All right, it looks like we're still batting 1,000% on our polling questions. 1/2 of your grains must be whole grain rich. And I've not heard much response from the schools, but the few that have been to our cafeteria managers training here at the State Department have all commented that that's made life a little more simple for them, and the kids are eating somewhat better in the National School Lunch Program, that only half of their grains have to be whole grain rich. Now, milk is our last component in the lunch program. Of course, you have to offer a variety of fluid milk. It can be flavored, unflavored, skim, low fat, 1%, or fat-free. A variety of milk must not be limited to flavored milk choices, i.e. the flavored, fat-free, and low-fat chocolate milk. Currently, with the new, instead of having to ask for an exemption, USDA has allowed us to serve the higher fat content of milk, but we must have an unflavored option at all meals. Now, I say all meals, but we do know if at the snack program you have to choose 2 of those 5 lunch components. If you choose not to serve milk, that is fine. If you serve a vegetable and a fruit, or a fruit and a grain, that is acceptable. Milk does not have to be one of the 2 components at the snack program. And I know we haven't talked much about breakfast, so let's go over our breakfast components just a little bit, because it's the same components, only we drill down, and we have to offer 3 food components at breakfast: fruit, grains, and fluid milk. Now, our last bullet here says offer versus serve at breakfast is optional, at all grade levels. So there's no offer versus serve requirements at breakfast. There is some reasons that you might want to be offer versus serve at breakfast, but there is not a requirement that any of your grades be offer versus serve. The same type of meal pattern sheet, we have this in the child nutrition manual. It works the same as lunch. It breaks it down into the K through 5, the 6 through 8 grades, and the 9 through 12. Fruit is our first component again, and you notice that all grades, K through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12, have to be offered 1 cup of fruit per day and 5 cups through the week. Again, this sheet works like the lunch one, that the weekly requirement is to the left of the parentheses and the daily requirement is in the parentheses. The vegetable components, there are no required vegetable components at breakfast. There is a new memo out that has extended the vegetable component at breakfast, and you can find that under the resource library. Under other documents in CARS. We have resource library in CACFP and other documents in our school site in the CARS. So they're the same thing. That's where we upload all of our training materials and compliance manuals and any other information for training and other purposes can be found there. At breakfast, grains have to be offered. You have to offer at least one grain per day, 1 ounce of grain per day for all the grade groups. Then, if you notice, K through 5 has to be offered 7 over the week, 6 through 8 is 8 over the week, and 9 through 12 is 9. Now, if you're doing a K through 12 menu for your breakfast, you have to offer the maximum. So you would have to offer at least 9 bread grains through the week. And of course, milk, you have to offer 1 cup per day to all grades. And you see the calories and the saturated fat and sodium targets listed there on that sheet. It's a good idea to keep those posted in your kitchen for your kitchen staff to be able to find those and know what the requirements are. The memo I was talking about, it says vegetables can be substituted for fruit at breakfast. The old regulation said, but only if the first 2 cups of the week were from the other subgroups. The new memo is SP 06-2020. You do not have to meet from the subgroups before you offer a starchy vegetable at this point. And then, example used to be you had to offer at least a red orange, a green leafy, and a bean before you offered a potato round or a hash brown. Well, now you can offer the hash brown without offering the other subgroups first. Now, in the National School Breakfast Program, there is no meat alternate component. However, if you want to offer a meat alternate, first you have to offer a grain component, and then you can offer a meat alternate that will credit as a grain component. So the fruit component at breakfast, like I said, 1 cup for all grades. You can serve more than 1 cup if you would like. You just want to look at the calories that are in the different fruits to make sure you're not exceeding the calorie limit. And just like in our lunch, if you're going to serve a juice, that it has to be 100% and no more than half of the weekly fruit offering can be in the form of juice. So crediting foods. Our first question would be, if that food item is in the food buying guide, then there's nothing else you need to do to credit that item, because the food buying guide will tell you exactly how it credits. If it's not in the food buying guide, then you have to go another step. So if there's a standardized recipe, if you're serving spaghetti and there's a standardized recipe for that, then you're fine. You can move on. USDA recipes are standardized. They're already complete, and they tell you the yields and the already documented for you. You would just have to make sure you use the right recipe number. And I also wanted to bring out that if you do not have the food buying guide in the electronic form, you can download the food buying guide on your phone. You can download it on your computer. It's a web-based program. You can create a username and log in and save stuff. Your personal information, not your personal information, but your personal information on food products that are in the food buying guide. It is an helpful tool to help you with your menu planning. There's also a link to the food buying guide, to a food buying guide webinar that we did a couple of months ago, that if you're interested, we kind of walk through how to use the food buying guide step by step. So if that food you're wanting to use, it's a chicken nugget. Chicken nuggets are not in the food buying guide, and chicken nugget doesn't have a standardized recipe. You're going to need what we call a CN label, or a child nutrition label, or a product formulation statement, because a chicken nugget has no standard of identity, because there's thousands of chicken nuggets and they contain different amounts of meat, different amounts of bread, different amounts of proteins. So to be able to serve that in the National School Lunch Program, we have to know what that specific chicken nugget would credit. This is just a copy of a CN label. This is in our manual on page CM, the cafeteria manager section, page 46. The CN labels have to have this pertinent information on them. They're going to be in a box, going to be in a rectangular box on usually the package or on the box. It's going to have a 6-digit product ID number up in the right-hand corner. It's going to have CN in all 4 sides. It's going to have the month and year of approval down at the lower, usually the very last statement in that CN label. And it describes the product and what the product credits for that product. So this one's talking about a 5-ounce. This 5-ounce piece of pizza provides 2 ounces of meat alternate, 1.5 ounce equivalent of red orange, and it doesn't tell us. This must be some of that crustless pizza, because I don't see where it talks about how much grain is in there. So maybe a keto pizza, who knows. The CN label products, if you do not have a CN label on the box, then you would want to have that as a watermark, and we would need to see the invoice for that. If you've copied the CN label from the internet or from somewhere else that you were given, we need to see those copies of those. So the CN label, if you don't want to keep the box, the cardboard in your files, you might want to make a copy of that. You might want to take a picture of that with your phone. They must be able to be read where we can look at those during a review situation. And the Watermarked CN, like I said, you have to have an invoice if you get an electronic copy from the vendor. And I added this sheet. This is this child nutrition label verification report. So if you're wanting to serve an item, but you can't find if this item really has a CN label or not, this CN label verification report is a good place to go look and see if it does have a CN product number and who makes it. Maybe maybe you want a specific vendor. You want something from, we'll just use Michael Foods. you want some product from Michael Foods. You saw it at a food show, and this would give you which product they have that does have a CN label. And if you need that website, you can get in touch with us, or you can, I think, Google USDA CN labeling, and it will come up. So what a product formulation statement is, would be if you received a statement from the vendor that stated what was in that product. So my chicken nugget example, their product formulation statement would tell you what kind of chicken they used, how much chicken, and compare it to the food buying guide. They would tell you, it would tell you how much bread grain was in that product. And if you're going to use an item and it doesn't have an approved CN label, and you're trying to get a product formulation statement from the vendor, it's always a good idea to send that product formulation statement to your consultant or here to the office to make sure that is a valid product formulation statement. We do find sometimes the vendors don't use the food buying guide to make sure what the yield is of a specific product, and therefore it's not a valid product formulation statement. And here on the screen is just a copy of a product formulation statement that goes through the different weights and measures for a product. And just want to bring your attention, this is not a CN label, this is a nutrient facts. It tells you the serving size, how many servings per container. We do need these during a review to prove your whole grain products, especially on the grain, so that we can see what the serving size was, the sodium and the fats that are in the nutrients for a nutrient analysis, if one is to be conducted for your school. Now, our last polling question, we're going to ask one last question, is offer versus serve must be implemented at breakfast for which grade groups? Do you have to implement offer versus serve at breakfast for all your grades, 9th through 12th, no grade groups, or your K through 8th graders? Okay, correct. No grade groups are required to offer versus serve at breakfast. Only your 9th through 12th graders have to have offer versus serve at lunch. You guys are awesome at the polling questions. Just absolutely awesome. Our last slide that we have is just a few resources. These can all be found under other documents in the Child Nutrition CARS website. So now, if you have any questions, you can type them in your chat box down below. I think you click down below somewhere. If you don't have any questions, again, I will be emailing you guys your certificates probably by tomorrow. And I don't see any questions popping up. Thank you guys. You guys have a great rest of your day.